The handcuffs snapped shut with a sharp click, and the man in the red polo shirt stopped talking on his cell phone mid-sentence. He didn't even try to argue. He just slowly turned his head toward the police officer, as if still trying to understand if this was really serious. The newest officer on the scene had a tense face, his jaw clenched. His uniform was impeccable, camera slung across his chest, his right hand firmly on the suspect's wrist. On the other side, a second, older officer stood, a step behind, scanning the parking lot, as if expecting someone to run out from behind a car at any moment. The man in the black cap, glasses and polo shirt with a small logo on the chest took a deep breath. He seemed more annoyed by the interruption of the call than by the handcuffs themselves. "Sir, hands behind your back, don't move," said the young policeman, maintaining his stern training voice. "I'm calm," the man replied, his English heavy with a slight but clear accent. "I just need to finish this call." The police officer didn't want to listen. The call had come in as suspicious individual, possibly trying to access a vehicle, strange behavior, talking on the phone and gesturing. And, in his mind, at the start of his shift, anything strange in a parking lot was something that could turn into a problem in seconds. He had watched too many videos. He had heard too many stories in the briefing. He didn't want to be the guy who let it slide. The place was an open parking lot, with few trees, next to a low building with a simple facade that looked more like a warehouse than an office. In the background, an access road and, beyond that, a row of houses. The sky was grey and heavy, as if it had decided not to rain or to clear the sky. The man in the red polo shirt aimed with his chin, since his hands were tied. The cell phone had been taken and was in the palm of the older policeman, who stared at the screen with a raised eyebrow. "Who were you talking to?" the older man asked. "With the security center on the other side of town," he said. "It's no small thing. You're wasting your time." The phrase sounded like a threat in the young policeman's head. It's not small. Wasting time. It was the kind of thing arrogant people said when they thought they could give orders. The young man leaned forward, bringing his face closer. "We decide if it's a waste of time. What's your name?" The man hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but as if he were calculating how much it was worth explaining. "Kenji Sato." The young policeman repeated the name, mentally noting it down, as if that alone would solve the problem. The older policeman, however, stared at the logo on the shirt. Chenem, embroidered in white. He had seen it somewhere before, but couldn't remember where. "What are you doing here, Kenji?" the young man insisted, using the first name on purpose to deflect attention. Kenji looked at the building, then at the ground, and finally at the two of them. "I work in industrial safety. They were expecting me. I arrived and saw a car with the trunk open. There was someone inside. I called the team and then someone called you." The young man looked toward the car. There was a dark sedan parked diagonally. The driver's door was open. No one was inside. An abandoned shopping cart was a few meters away. Nothing screamed crime, but nothing seemed normal either. "Who was that person?" the young man asked. "I didn't see the face. I only saw the movement." Kenji tried to turn slightly, to point better. "There, near that car, I approached. The person drove away quickly. I didn't chase." The young man let out a short, humorless laugh. "So you saw someone tinkering with a car and decided to approach. And now you're saying we're wasting our time. Great." The older police officer, who had Kenji's cell phone, saw the screen light up again. Missed calls. 1, 2, 3. A contact saved as EOC, Director. The acronym triggered. Something in his memory, like a loose thread. "EOC," murmured the older one, without realizing he had spoken aloud. The young man didn't care. His gaze was fixed on the suspect and the idea of control. He nodded toward the patrol car. "We're going to put you in the back seat until we can verify your story." Kenji closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't tiredness. It was that kind of quiet indignation of someone who has seen the same mistake repeated many times. "If you put me in the car, you're going to delay something that could hurt people," he said simply, without shouting. The young man turned his face towards the older man. He's making threats. That's a threat. The older one, still looking at the phone screen, didn't answer right away. He was trying to remember where he knew the acronym and logo from. That's when the sound of a siren came from afar, fast, cutting through the air. It wasn't the patrol's own siren. It was another vehicle approaching, speeding as if it were running late. A white SUV pulled into the parking lot and stopped crookedly, not even fitting into the space. The door opened before the car came to a complete stop. A man in a vest, not in police uniform, got out running, with a briefcase in his hand and a radio strapped to his shoulder. "Where is he?" she shouted, looking around until she saw Kenji in handcuffs. The young man instinctively raised his hand. "Sir, stop right there." The newcomer didn't stop. He came straight in, quickly, his face red, a mixture of anger and urgency. "Did you handcuff Dr. Sato? Have you all gone mad?" The young man froze for half a second. "Who are you?" "County Emergency Coordination." He pulled out his badge and shoved it in the young man's face. "I don't have time for this. Let him go now." The young man looked at the name tag and then at his older partner, as if asking for confirmation. The older man was already different, his posture more careful, and he finally put the pieces together. "I knew I'd seen that logo before," he said quietly. Kenji opened his eyes and stared at the coordinator. "They took my phone." The call dropped. "I know. We've been calling you non-stop." The coordinator turned to the police officers. "There's a reported leak in the industrial corridor. The containment team is already on its way, but he's the consultant who created the response protocol. He knows the place like the back of his hand. He was coming straight here to coordinate with the warehouse personnel, because there's sensitive products stored there." The young man stood still, as if the ground had suddenly changed texture. He looked at Kenji, then at the parking lot, and his hardened expression turned to confusion. "Sir?" he began, but couldn't find the next word. The older one took a step back and spoke in the lowest voice possible, like someone trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. "We received a call about a suspect attempting to break into a car. We followed procedure." The coordinator swore briefly, took a breath, and pointed to the handcuffs. "A mindless procedure becomes a problem. Let him go." The young man hesitated a second longer than he should have, and this irritated the coordinator even more. But the older policeman didn't wait. He approached, took the key, and unlocked it. The metal opened. Kenji rubbed his wrists slowly. His skin was marked. The young man took a step back, as if the older man had now grown up. Kenji didn't shout, didn't demand anything. He simply picked up the phone the older man had returned and looked at the missed calls, as one might see a broken clock. "I need to call back," he said. The coordinator nodded, already pulling out the radio. "He's going to talk to the center, and then we'll go together. You two," he looked at the police officers, "if you want to help, block the entrance to the street and keep onlookers away. And for God's sake, no more theatrics." The young man blushed and swallowed hard. I didn't know." Kenji looked up. "I believe you didn't know," he said. "That's the problem." It wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a fact, thrown out there. They walked toward the SUV, but Kenji stopped for a second and looked at the dark sedan that had caught his attention earlier. The door was still open, the trunk now closed. Something didn't add up. "Who owns that car?" he asked, pointing. The young man, trying to regain his usefulness, acted quickly. "The license plate is registered to a maintenance company. We haven't checked yet." Kenji took a step toward the sedan, unhurried but focused. The older man followed. "Don't touch," Kenji said. "Just look." He leaned forward and observed the interior. A back seat with a coat thrown over it, a plastic box on the floor, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was a detail. The smell. A smell that didn't match upholstery and dust. A light, almost sweet, almost imperceptible chemical odor, but one that made Kenji inhale through the corner of his mouth, like someone unintentionally tasting wine. "This isn't normal," he murmured. The coordinator heard and came running. "What it was?" Kenji pointed to the plastic box. "I want you to call the hazardous materials squad, now." The young man's eyes widened. "It's just a car." Kenji turned to him. This time his gaze was hard. "Just one car is like people dying in parking lots." The older one grabbed the radio from his belt. "Central, this is Unit 2. I need hazmat at this address." The voice on the radio responded with noise, confused, asking why. Kenji was already on the phone, speaking to someone on the other end, quickly and directly. The coordinator heard snippets. "Tanks, ventilation, don't use sprinklers, keep personnel away." The young man stood still, his chest rising and falling. He had handcuffed the man, who was now giving instructions that seemed to save the day, and he knew it would show up in reports, on camera, in hallway conversations. He tried to compose himself, as if he could fold up the shame and put it away. The older man, on the other hand, was coldly calm. He had seen too many shifts to cling to pride. He watched Kenji like one watches a doctor in an emergency room, not because he finds him handsome, but because he knows that, at that moment, the person knows what he's doing. The white SUV didn't leave. They stood there for minutes that seemed long, waiting for the right team, while the parking lot began to attract people. An employee came out of the building and watched from a distance. A neighbor pulled out his cell phone and started filming. A truck passed by too slowly. Kenji noticed his neighbor's camera and pointed it out to the young man with his chin. "Move him away. No fighting. Just move him away." The young man obeyed. He went to his neighbor, spoke softly, the kind of conversation that begins with "Sir, please," and ends with a grumble and a step back. The siren returned, now closer, and 2 different vehicles arrived, followed by a pickup truck with a hazard symbol. A firefighter wearing a helmet got out and looked at the sedan. "Who summoned hazmat?" The coordinator raised his hand. "Him." She pointed to Kenji. The firefighter turned to Kenji, sizing him up, and then to the police officers. "Why does he have handcuff marks on him?" The young man opened his mouth, but Kenji cut him off without aggression. "That doesn't matter now. Look at the car, smell it, without opening anything, and don't let anyone smoke in here." The firefighter signaled to the team. One of them grabbed a portable detector. He approached the open door. The device beeped once, then went silent. The man frowned and changed the angle. It beeped again, more insistently. The coordinator swallowed hard. "What is it?" "I don't know yet, but there's some reading involved." The coach looked at Kenji. "What do you suspect?" Kenji responded without dramatizing. "I suspect someone was trying to use a regular car to bring something closer to the warehouse, and someone ran away when they saw movement." The young man felt a chill in his stomach. He remembered the initial call, possibly trying to access a vehicle. He had treated it as minor. Now it seemed something else. One of the firefighters asked everyone to move away, and the parking lot began to empty. The building employee ran back inside. The neighbor who was filming stopped filming when he realized that the men in helmets were serious. Kenji leaned towards the coordinator. "Do you have a blueprint of the warehouse?" "I have it." The coordinator opened the folder and pulled out folded sheets of paper. Kenji glanced quickly, his fingers tracing lines as if reading a memory map. He paused at a point. "Here, if anyone wants to cause trouble, they'll aim for this wing. It has ventilation that pulls air inwards." The coordinator nodded. "We are already evacuating." The young man, wanting to do something right, asked, "Can we help with the evacuation?" Kenji looked at him again. The hardness had lessened slightly. "Yes, you can, and you can learn something. When someone is on the phone, asking for help, and you take the phone away, you may be cutting the only thread holding a situation together." The young man remained silent. It wasn't a theatrical reprimand. It was a phrase that sank in and stayed with him. The hazmat team put on masks and gloves and began handling the plastic box inside the car. It wasn't large. It seemed ordinary. One of them carefully opened it. Inside were small bottles and a soaked cloth. The detector beeped louder. The firefighter stepped back, signaling. "That's laboratory stuff," he said. Kenji kept a neutral expression. "And there's a lab 2 blocks away. with a product that shouldn't be out of control. The coordinator ran his hand over his face. This is going to make headlines. Kenji looked up at the grey sky and then at the building. I don't know about the headline. I only know that there are people who like to test how slowly a place responds. If you go slow, they'll come back. The young man heard that like a slap in the face. He had been slow. He had turned urgency into procedure. While the team was securing the area, a man in a rumpled suit arrived, panting, from a black car. He looked small amidst the uniform and helmet, but there was an authoritative look in his gaze. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. The coordinator went to him. "Director, I was trying to speak with Sato. The director looked at Kenji and made a relieved expression. "Thank God." He approached, shaking Kenji's hand without caring about the marks on his wrist. "I heard you were detained. I'll deal with that later. Now tell me what you need." The young man saw the scene and for the first time grasped its magnitude. He wasn't just any consultant. He wasn't some guy. He was someone the director of the emergency center treated as a key player. Kenji didn't strike a pose. He spoke softly and directly. "I need 2 street closures, a complete evacuation of that building and the lab, and I need someone to check the parking lot cameras. The individual who ran out may have left more behind." The director nodded without question. "Done." The young man swallowed again. The older man touched his shoulder, an almost imperceptible gesture, as if to say, "Hold on." When the director stepped away to give orders, Kenji was left alone with the 2 police officers for a second. The older officer seemed to want to apologize, but couldn't find the right tone. The younger one, however, decided to speak. "Mr. Sato, I was wrong. I thought that—" He paused, searching for words. "I thought it was someone trying to be clever. I saw the way you spoke. Kenji interrupted with a hand gesture. "You saw what your mind was already prepared to see." The young man stood there without answering. Kenji continued, his voice lower, almost like advice devoid of affection, just realism. "You don't need to become weak. You just need to leave room for the possibility that you might be wrong." The oldest one finally spoke. "Sir, have you worked with the police before?" Kenji looked at the badge on the older man's shoulder, and then at his face. "I worked in disaster response. When things go wrong, everyone becomes a police officer, firefighter, and doctor all at once. I just learned to speak quickly and to listen to what people aren't saying." The coordinator's radio crackled with news. A leak in the industrial corridor had been contained, but sabotage was suspected in a ventilation system. Kenji closed his eyes for a split second, as if fitting another piece of the puzzle together. "It wasn't an accident," he said. The young man asked, almost whispering, "So, this was a distraction?" Kenji looked at the sedan, at the building, at the sky. "It could be, or it could be part 2. The director returned, with his cell phone in his hand. "State police want to speak with you." Kenji picked up the device and spoke without ceremony. The young man and the older man only heard isolated words: route, truck, license plate, intercept. The parking lot, which at first seemed like a place without history, now resembled the center of a chessboard. Each parked car posed a question. Each person watching from afar could simply be curious, or they could be someone waiting. The young man felt his throat go dry. He looked at his own hands, remembering the metal clasp on Kenji's wrist, and imagined what would have happened if the coordinator had taken 5 more minutes. He imagined a news report with numbers, sirens, people coughing. He imagined his own name appearing in a cell phone video with a cruel caption. He didn't want to imagine anymore. An additional patrol car arrived, and a sergeant hurried down. The sergeant looked at the young man, then at the older man, then at Kenji, and his face changed, recognizing him. "Mr. Sato," she said, surprised. Kenji nodded. "Sergeant Rivera." The young man blinked. The sergeant knew him by name. It was no coincidence. Rivera turned to the 2 police officers. "Do you know who he is?" The young man replied, embarrassed. I'm finding out now." Rivera exhaled through his nose without laughing. He was the guy who trained half of our staff when we had that incident at the treatment plant. He spent a week here sleeping in a chair. Rivera looked at Kenji. Are you okay? Kenji showed his wrists, as if showing a scratch. I'm alive. That's already an advantage. Rivera turned to the young man and didn't shout. He spoke softly, which would have been worse. You handcuffed a guy who could have been saving you. Learn from this. The young man nodded, his eyes lowered. Kenji, for some reason, didn't let the humiliation escalate too much, perhaps because he knew he needed everyone to function properly. Rivera, I need two things, Kenji said, pointing. One of yours will go with me to check the entrance to the warehouse. The other will go with Hazmat in the car. Rivera did not hesitate. Done. The young man waited, trying to be invisible, but Kenji turned to face him. You're coming too. The young man looked up, surprised. You? Did you see the suspect? Kenji asked. No, I only saw you, sir. So now you're here to see what it's like when handcuffs don't solve things. The young man swallowed and nodded. They walked toward the building, passing newly put-up yellow tape. The air had a stronger smell now, or perhaps it was their heads that had started paying attention. Kenji stopped at the door and leaned his hand against the wall as if he felt a vibration. Listen, he said. The young man fell silent. A low hum came from inside, like a large fan. Kenji looked at the coordinator. Who turned off the ventilation? Nobody. We were trying, but the coordinator paused. There's a panel that's not responding. Kenji took a deep breath. This is not good. He looked at the young man. Do you have an access key? No. So stay here. If anyone tries to come in, you hold them back, not with bravado, with attention. The young man nodded, feeling that for the first time on his shift, he had a role that made sense. Kenji entered with Rivera and the coordinator. The young man stood in the doorway, looking from side to side, feeling the cold wind on his face and thinking that just minutes before he had thought the danger was the man in the red polo shirt. His radio crackled with information. A truck had been stopped a few kilometers away. The driver was nervous, the cargo was irregular. The young man didn't understand everything, but he understood the word irregular. He understood the tone. From inside the building, a metallic noise, as if something had hit something. The young man tightened his grip on his belt. He didn't go in. He stayed, as Kenji had instructed, alert. A shadow flashed past the corner of the building quickly. The young man turned and saw a thin man in a grey sweatshirt walking briskly toward the houses. He wasn't running, but it wasn't a stroll either. He was carrying a small backpack. The young man didn't think twice. He called on the radio, described the situation, and began to follow at a distance, keeping the person in his field of vision. He didn't want to repeat the mistake of reacting without understanding, but he wasn't going to ignore it either. The man in the sweatshirt looked back once and sped off. The young man sped off too. He didn't yell, "Stop!" He didn't draw a weapon. He just followed, like patient prey. Rivera appeared beside him, emerging as if he had been there the whole time. "This one?" Rivera asked. "To be." Rivera signaled to a patrol car that was at the roadblock. Two police officers cut across the street in front of the man in the sweatshirt. He tried to change direction and then realized he was surrounded. He stopped, slowly raising his hands. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice trembling. Rivera responded calmly. "So, relax and talk." While Rivera searched carefully, the young man observed the backpack. Inside, wires, a small bottle, disposable gloves. It wasn't a school bag. It wasn't a gym bag. The young man felt his stomach drop. Rivera looked at him, without needing to speak. On the other side, Kenji emerged from the building with a serious expression and a piece of paper in his hand, as if he had torn it from a bulletin board. "I found this," he said, pointing. "Someone manually locked the system. It wasn't a bug." The director came running in, heard the last sentence, and swore. "We're in the middle of a bigger operation than it seemed." Kenji looked at the young man, then at the man in the sweatshirt who was now being handcuffed, and then at the isolated sedan. "I told you that you were wasting your time," he said, taking no pleasure in being right. The young man lowered his head and breathed, trying not to let shame turn into anger. He had a chance to learn without anyone having died, and that was rare. An ambulance drove past on the nearby street, siren blaring. The sky remained gray. The parking lot seemed emptier, colder. Rivera approached with the detained man. He says he was just delivering something and then leaving. He doesn't say to whom. Kenji looked at the detainee without hatred. Some people always tell someone. You just need to find the right thread. The director was already on the phone with another agency, requesting backup, explaining the situation. The coordinator was taking notes. Firefighters were working. The world had turned into a fast-paced machine. The young man found himself for a moment on the outside, as a spectator, and then Kenji lightly touched his shoulder. "Do you still have the handcuffs?" he asked. The young man, confused, showed it. "I have." Kenji pointed to a tape lying on the ground near the sedan. "Pick it up with gloves and put it in a bag. Don't let anyone step on it. Every detail is now worth more than pride." The young man obeyed, and as he put on the glove and picked up the tape, he realized something simple. Kenji wasn't trying to teach a lesson. He was just trying to keep everyone alive. Hours later, when the parking lot was already full of vehicles and people in vests, when the surrounding streets were blocked and the warehouse evacuated, someone finally asked aloud, near the young man, "Who is this Sato anyway?" The young man answered without thinking, as if the answer had already sunk in. "He's the guy the city calls when nobody wants to make a mistake." And when he said that, he realized he had handcuffed exactly that person. Kenji, on the other side of the yellow tape, spoke into the phone once more, his face tired but unfocused. He glanced over the phone and met the young man's gaze. There was no resentment there, just a kind of silent warning. Pay attention to what's in front of you, not what you think. The young man nodded, almost imperceptibly. The rain finally decided to fall, fine and cold, washing the asphalt. The white logo on Kenji's red shirt got wet and glistened for a second under the car's lights. And amidst the noise of the radio and the water, the young man heard Rivera say to another police officer in a low voice, "Imagine if we had put him in the car and taken him to the police station. Today would be a different kind of day." The young man didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on the evidence bag, feeling the plastic slip in the rain, and stood there, at the edge of the tape, guarding the entrance, just as he should have done from the start. A traffic supervisor rushed past and asked the young man to fill out a quick report right there on a crumpled notepad. The pen failed because of the water, and he had to scribble, rewrite, and smudge the paper. The red light of the body cam flashed incessantly on his chest, reminding him that every second had been recorded, including the click of the handcuffs. He didn't try to hide the trembling in his hand. He just wrote. When he finished, he looked up and saw Kenji pointing to the corner, asking on the radio to close another access point. He ran.